Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Greetings of peace and welcome to ING's webinar series on Muslim African Americans titled Expanding Muslim American Experiences Beyond the Immigrant Story. The title for the series, for the webinar series we're providing at ING provides the context, which is aimed for immigrant Muslim communities to learn more about the long history of Muslims in America and the many contributions of African Americans to that history, a topic which is not widely known and what we're planning to explore in the webinar series. Now, ING comes to this conversation through our work countering Islamophobia by teaching the public about and facilitating engagement with Muslim Americans. And so we are here about to engage with esteemed Muslim African American Muslim leaders, to learn more about their important history and contributions in the context of both the Muslim American community and the larger American public. For the Muslims watching the series is an important opportunity for you to learn more about ourselves, first and foremost, as well as the intersections of religion and race, which will help us do a better job in countering not only Islamophobia, but all forms of bigotry and racism. We welcome your participation and hope that we can all benefit from this knowledge that will help promote greater inclusion, mutual understanding, respect, and harmony in both the Muslim American community and America at large. We're starting the series today with the history of how Islam first comes to the US through enslaved Africans and the reappearance of Islam in subsequent centuries. And with us to speak on this are first my colleague from ING, Ishaq Batan, which you'll see on the screen. He is our Bay Area director. And then my two personal friends and esteemed scholars and experts, Imam Fahim Shwaib, who is the resident imam of the Warathin Mosque in Oakland. And he's been there for over 36 years. And then of course, Dr. Bilal King, who is now a senior diversity consultant at Yardstick Management and an associate professor at Morehouse College. So welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us. Today, let me begin for the sake of our Muslim audience by asking you, Imam Fahim and Dr. Bilal, why should immigrants or children of immigrant Muslims care about this topic? Which is their history in America that goes back centuries and not when they arrived in the United States. So I just want to remind the speakers to please keep their answers brief to 3 to 4 minutes because we have a lot to cover in the 45 to 55 minutes of this webinar. So whoever wants to go first, please do.
Well, I defer to my elder.
Imam Fahim, why should immigrants or children of immigrants care about this topic, this history, their history in America that goes back centuries?
You're muted, so.
Unmute myself.
Yep.
Okay, great. Alhamdulillah, bismillah. I'll stick with the who I am part of it. Meaning that it's always a pressing issue to me for Muslims of all stripes and all ethnicities. Listen, you say you're a Muslim. That's not just a superficial title or a label. It means something. It means that there's an expected behavior from you. And there are things that Muslims believe and do. That's it. It doesn't matter in the context of, that is, the religion doesn't change based on your ethnicity. The religion doesn't change for an Asian, for an African, for a European, etc. Likewise for an American Muslim. So the same obligations and responsibilities on every individual Muslim applies to every Muslim collectively. So why should they care? Because it's an expression of the requirements of the religion. Now, if whoever it is, if they're making a distinction between, well, there's me, the ethnic individual, and there's me, the religious person, and we know there's groups of people who identify themselves only in their cultural or ethnic representation, but don't practice or identify themselves in their religious identification. If we behave that way, then we fall into the same trap and the same lapse that comes with that. So from the perspective of what the religion says, it's because you're supposed to help each other. You're supposed to help each other. None of you is a Muslim until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself, and that includes males and females. I know political correctness automatically comes into this question, but it means anyone, any person. You are not true to what you say you believe until you love for, I'm going to say, the other, what you love for yourself. And so to say that I don't have to do that for someone, or why should I be concerned, is an expression of hypocrisy, and to put it bluntly. So because there is this requirement of us, and I feel it bubbling up, that is the Ansar and the Muhajir paradigm. I feel it bubbling up. It's coming more and more to the surface, coming more and more as a proposal. And there are complexities about it that have to be worked out. But because we are in a very special place like no other in America, yes, with all of its problems, one of my paradigms for it is Beauty and the Beast. America is Beauty and the Beast. So we have to learn to take benefit from that as Muslims. In fact, Frederick Douglass, is one of his famous statements is, we can either stand together as men or hang separately as fools. So the idea is to recognize that we both mutually represent aid and assistance to each other in a situation that is beyond our individual capacity to master, or our individual capacity to thrive in the face of the nature of the forces that we are up against. So it's for your own good. We can put it that way. It's for your own good. Help me, help you, in an old movie reference. You know, it's like Jerry Maguire, right? The guy said, "Help me, help you." So that's how we have to help each other. And that's what God has told us in the Quran. Join together, warabitu. Join together and support each other, not in wrong, not in wrongdoing, but help each other in taqwa. So I see that. Much more to be said.
Yeah, very good.
Alhamdulillah.
Why history specifically, though, Imam? Why is history important? Many immigrant Muslims like myself, have come here in the 60s and 70s, and we think that our history in America begins then.
Yeah.
Why is it?
May I?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Go ahead.
My thoughts on it actually speak directly to the history.
Mhm.
My answer is that, people should care because Black Americans' 500 years of experience with white supremacy from the inside is available to Muslims who've come here more recently, who've dealt with white supremacy only in much more recent times. It's available to you free of charge. Our history, our lessons learned, simply because you're Muslim brothers and sisters. But the cost of ignoring that history, not internalizing that history, is that your grandchildren probably won't be Muslim. Your grandchildren probably will identify as Muslim, but the pressure for them to be only Muslim in identity and in reality be classist, militarist, and racist, to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., no relation, by the way. We haven't found the link. To be at the other extreme, so full blown in liberalism that they are atheistic socialists, substantively speaking, a different kind of militarism, even imperial militarism, even in support. It's tremendous. This pressure has a pretty demonstrated history of being able to overwhelm people, right? To really just identify yourself as something, but to behaviorally just fall lock and step in one piece or the other of the American political spectrum, right? But if our recently immigrated brothers and sisters, communities full of recent immigrants and their children, fully internalize our history, and we fully internalize your histories, we will gain from this the means to not just resist, but I think actually kill white supremacy.
Mhm. So based on my experience, when I learned about our long history and the fact that we've been here since the enslaved Africans, which is actually a recent discovery for me in the last 10 years, it actually made me feel more American and belonging to America, because now I could trace my narrative, my history back 2 centuries.
You're
And
not new.
what a gift that was. What a gift that was. Imam Fahim, do you want to add anything to the why is history important?
Well, yeah. I don't know if I don't know the exact quote. The professor probably I would hold that. I would hope and I expect that that whoever fails to study their history is doomed to repeat it.
Repeat it. Right.
You know, and James Baldwin, I believe, he says that if you're unable to reinterpret your history, then you'll become a slave to it, or you become imprisoned by it. And another, you know, clinical expression about the importance of history. I mean, you're kind of crazy if you don't know when you are and where you are. You know, if you don't know when you are and where you are, you're pretty much crazy. So in the context of knowing, okay, where am I and when am I? You know, I am now. I didn't just start now. My whole life didn't start now. There's a continuity to my existence, and I need to have the true location of, quote unquote, where I am and when I am. Without that, you suffer from what's called a diachronic discontinuity. And this diachronic discontinuity is sort of what leads to these multiple split personality, or these multiple personality disorders, right? Because you know, you really don't know, when did I stop, when did I begin? In fact, that's a part of the thesis inside of The Invisible Man, you know, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, this kind of disconnection between what was and where he is right now. And many people, and I'm speaking specifically of African Americans in general, and then African American Muslims in particular, if you come to Al-Islam with that brokenness in place, then you're going to engage Islam in a broken kind of way. And it's for other Muslims. Like, you know, Maha, you've been very open about your own personal experience. The idea you have to reconnect with your religion, and also then connect that religion with the time of who you are and where you are. Now you come to this kind of wholeness. So the kind of transformation that you've experienced is an experience that so many others have to have.
Right. I love that. That's it actually works both ways. It helps me belong to America, to know the history of you know, my roots going back to the enslaved Muslim West Africans, and I think it also helps African Americans sort of address the brokenness when they're connected to the worldwide Muslim ummah, so to speak. So it works both ways. I never thought about that. Ishaq, at ING, we deliver a presentation titled A History of Muslims in America. And we've had this presentation now for about 15 years, thanks to actually Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who came to us and said, you know, this is new history that's been you know, written about by Sylvia and Diouf and Alan Austin and others. Hey, you guys should do these presentations in schools to supplement education about Muslims and Islam and history. And so we, with his help, we created this presentation called A History of Muslims in America, which we now deliver to schools and other venues. Ishaq, can you briefly tell us what the presentation covers? I know that it you know, takes up to 2 hours to present. We're not going to give you 2 hours. We're only going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes to just give us an overview of that history, which will be the focus of follow-up conversations that we're going to have with our speakers today. And also, Ishaq, also, if you could just let people know how to access this presentation after you're done. So you have 10 to 15 minutes, okay?
Great, thank you. So thank you, Maha, for asking the question about the presentation. And thank you to our main speakers, Dr. Mansabalal, Imam Fahim, for already your comments. And then I'm looking forward to hearing your comments on the rest of the webinar, especially in relation to shedding more light on some of the things that I'll discuss in my presentation. So I'm gonna just start by sharing my screen. And this is a presentation that we deliver, as Maha said. It's called The History of Muslims in the United States, and it is very long, and so I'm tasked with the difficult thing of making it very short. So I will basically talk a little bit about the history of Muslims before Columbus and theories that surround that, as well as the enslaved West African Muslims. And then I'll fast forward a little bit to the African American rediscovery of Muslims, touch a little bit on white and Latino Muslims, a little bit on Muslim influences on American culture, and then end very briefly on Muslim immigrants to the United States. And that you'll see by the nature of how much time I spend on each topic to see the level of, where that lands in our history in the United States. I'm gonna just fast forward here. Okay, so it's well documented that Muslims come here at least 400, 500 years ago with the enslaved Africans, but there are theories to suggest that Muslims have been here prior to Columbus. And so a lot of the substantiations of these theories rely on a few different pieces of, evidence, one of which would be clay terracotta statues. And so on the slide here are these images of these statues that were found throughout Central and South America. And the markings and the jewelry that are exhibited on these statues that were found in these regions are very similar to what one might find in the West African nations at the time. And when you take this and you add in other ideas, it suggests that African Muslims coming primarily from West Africa over here, they might have been some of the first people to approach the Americas due to a lot of factors, including a quite proximity to the New World, that the just distance between the two is not that much. Another thing is that the West African kingdoms at the time were some of the most advanced nations that existed to their counterparts across the world. And part of that advancement included a strong sense of development of boats that were incredibly well crafted, and combined with a strong sense of navigational experience that these people held. And furthermore, when you take all of that and you factor in very powerful equatorial currents, that meant that if someone were to enter into these currents, then it was very likely that may be pushed all the way into the Americas. When you take all these into account, then it is quite likely that some of these people were able to approach the Americas.
Ishaq, could you make your presentation into presentation mode? Because we can actually see the next slide and the notes.
It's not good.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Just make it a presentation. You might want to, okay, yeah.
No, is that not working?
No, it's not working. Yeah. I wonder why.
Oh, I got it. Hold on.
Okay.
And well, you can tell I was not reading from the notes. There we go.
Yeah, no, I guess that's okay. Yeah, there you go.
Good now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for telling me, Maha.
Sure.
So to continue, to kind of combine what I just mentioned with narratives, that King Mansa Musa was one of the most famous kings in Mali, in the civilization of Mali in the 1300s. He told a story of his brother, who was King Abu Bakr II. And his brother was basically fixated on an idea of reaching the furthest limit of the seas. And as a result, went and tried to do this by taking thousands of boats filled with men as well as provisions and basically set sail. They never found him again. And so there's a question of whether or not he, the whole kind of fleet perished along the way, or that they actually made it there. And then when you take in that into account with the statues, as well as some more statues here, where on the left we have a statue of from the Malian civilization, and then on the right we have statues from Peru, and you can again see that the markings are similar. The headwear that the person in Peru is wearing is similar to Muslim traditional skull cap headwear, and so on, thus suggesting that perhaps this is a theory that really is very much true. Whether or not it is true, though, kind of leads to the idea of the enslaved West African Muslims, of which 20 to 30% of enslaved African Muslims were Muslim, which is a really large number, and primarily they were coming from West Africa. I'm going to backtrack to then look at Esteban, and Esteban, born Mustafa Azamouri in Morocco, was the first known documented African American, and he also is Muslim. And his story is quite complicated in terms of getting, in terms of being enslaved, then finding freedom, or escaping, and then being enslaved again by different people. And so he kind of has a very interesting idea, but all in all, he makes of himself a guide as well as a healer. And you can see his journey from here, which is in the Caribbean, and he ends up going all the way through Florida and then into what is present-day Mexico. I'm now going to talk a little bit more about some profiles of enslaved African Muslims, of which, it's really important to recognize that every one of these people had a story. Every one of these people had a family and had everything that kind of led to them, but a lot of it is erased. And so whatever we have left is something that we really need to cherish. And looking at that, one really famous one is Job, the son of Solomon, or Ayyub ibn Sulayman. And he was actually from a royal family in Bandu, which is present-day Senegal. And he was he eventually was able to, while he was enslaved, he was able to practice his religion, and he was known to be very knowledgeable and very devout to the Muslim faith. And then he wrote a letter home, and because of the eloquence of his letter, his slave owner freed him and enabled him to go home. On his way home, he actually traveled to England, where he met with the King of England, was presented with different gifts, and then was also responsible for translating a few versions of the Quran, and then eventually went back to Senegal. Another example is Yarrow Mamout, or Yarrow Mahmud, who was from, I believe what is known as Guinea, and then was living in Maryland in the DC area. And also due to his education level and well-likeness, he was also awarded his freedom. And his portrait was painted by Charles Wilson Beale, who was someone who painted founding fathers, kind of showing a very high esteem to this person. And he eventually stayed as a free man alongside many other free African Americans in the DC area. Another is Prince Abdurrahman Ibrahima Sori, who was a prince from his Fulani kingdom. And he was called prince by his slave owner because of the way he carried himself with a lot of dignity. He kind of settles and then marries another slave with him, and then has a family. And then after 40 years of slavery is able to return home, but unfortunately, he actually does not make it home. He passes away before he actually makes it there. Omar ibn Said is another really interesting one because he's also from a noble family and had the education level that's equivalent of many PhDs today in terms of mastery of language as well as of concept. And he was known to have escaped and then found a new slave owner. And he's said to have converted to Christianity, and his slave owner gave him a Bible. But in his Bible, he actually wrote many different benedictions to the Prophet Muhammad, as well as chapters of the Quran. And so it's kind of unclear. But he was responsible for writing sermons to the local preacher in his town in North Carolina. And he also was, I believe, the only enslaved person to write an autobiography that we still have today. And then finally, there are two Georgian Bilalis who basically were able to kind of rise rank within their own plantations and take the position of being an overseer, where they would manage other enslaved people. And Bilali Muhammad especially was interesting because he served as an imam to the African-American Muslims that were in his plantation. And that this community, this African-American community, is the oldest documented Muslim community in the United States. And so when you factor in all of these people, you see different profiles of enslaved people, and these are just a few out of many, who dealt with their situation in different ways, whether by returning home, whether by staying as free people here, whether by living, rising within their ranks, or by, unfortunately, just remaining as slaves for most of their life. Some of the descendants of Muslim slaves include certain abolitionists like Martin Delaney, as well as Henry Highland Garnet. And I believe Dr. Mansa will talk a little bit more about what happens after a lot of these enslaved people pass away. after slavery and after kind of the Emancipation Proclamation and freedom for the African American community, there still is tons of segregation and tons of discrimination towards that community. And then African Americans at the time in the late 1800s, early 1900s are trying to figure out ways that they can build up and navigate, this discrimination that they have been facing. And some of them turn to Islam, the religion of their ancestors, as a means of doing that. And so one example is the Islamic Mission of America, founded in the 1920s by an Afro-Caribbean couple, Sheikh Daoud and Mother Khadija, who were fairly mainstream in their teachings in establishing mosques all throughout the East Coast. And they were a multi-ethnic, multi-racial community, as you can see in the pictures here. Additionally, there were other movements, including the Moorish Science Temple, founded by Noble Drew Ali, where Noble Drew Ali traced the African ancestry not to other parts of Africa, but to the Moors, who were Spanish Muslims, basically. And that's why they dressed a certain way that they did here. And they set up temples and built a strong sense of nationalism and self-sufficiency throughout the United States. And then the most notable is Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, alongside his wife, Clara Muhammad, who founded that in Detroit in the 1930s, really to build up a strong sense of an African-American community and eliminate a lot of the, and establish a sense of dignity that was not being given to them by the rest of society at the time. And it is in that Nation of Islam that many Muslims turn to Islam or rediscover Islam, including Malcolm X, as well as Muhammad Ali, two very prominent African-American leaders throughout the United States. Elijah Muhammad dies in 1975, and his son, Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, assumes leadership, and he actually disbands the nation and brings most of the followers to mainstream Sunni Islam. And then eventually his counterpart, Louis Farrakhan, kind of reignites the nation and then takes leadership of it, of which I believe he still has leadership today. And so in this process, you see a strong sense of movement and rediscovery of Muslims, of African-American Muslims, through these really important movements that kind of exist throughout the late 18 and then mid 1900s. And that paves way for many African-American Muslims today, including politicians, including athletes, and just all throughout the society. There's also a sense of white and Latino Muslims, including Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, who represented the Muslims in the first Parliament of World Religions and had a newspaper. There are present-day African-American Muslims like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf Henson, who is the founder of Zaytuna College. There's notable Latinx Muslims such as Mark Gonzalez, who is an author. And then there's Muslim influences on culture that kind of exist, including whether in the form of names of towns or in the form of architecture of, Spanish-style architecture, the form of cuisine. But I think more notably, kind of embedded in some of the American West African legacy of jazz and blues that draw from these West African traditions, including and then hail, prominent musicians such as Yusuf Lateef and Ahmad Jamal, as well as Muslim MCs like Mos Def, Lupe Fiasco, and Q-Tip, and others who, alongside the 5%ers, really contributed to hip hop by incorporating tons of references to Islam and Muslims. And then I'm just going to end with Muslim immigrants here to show that Muslim immigrants start coming to the United States in the early 1850s with people like Haji Ali, who kind of serves for like a camel expedition, and then found other mosques, including the one in Watts, North Dakota, Michigan City, Indiana, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, all of which ironically are interested in the Midwest, where they came from, primarily the Middle East or parts of Asia. And then that fast forwards to other Muslim immigrants, including people like Fazlur Rahman Khan, who designed the Sears Tower and the John Hancock Tower in Chicago. And then most recently, the immigrants that come here after 1965. And so in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Immigration Act of 1965, which was directly tied to the struggles of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, whereby he opens up the country to enable more professionals or people studying to become professionals, primarily from places like Africa or Asia. And it is at that point that many come into this country. And so recognizing that Muslims in their kind of immigrant fashion, the bulk of which only really come here in the last 60 or so years, it's really important to recognize that this is such a small part of the Muslim experience in the Americas, which spans so many more hundreds of years. And so this presentation really just scratches the surface of recognizing the long history of Muslims in the United States that then just ends with a small snippet of immigrant Muslims, like people like my parents, as an example. And I think it's incumbent upon American Muslims now to really recognize the level of history that they have, that goes back hundreds of years, to internalize it and then to teach it as fundamentally the Muslim American experience. And in doing so, they can root themselves more closely in being Americans, but also pay homage to the sacrifices of all of the people that came before, to pave way for everything that enabled the Muslim immigrant community to thrive in the way that it does today in the United States. And so we highly encourage educators, whether in Islamic schools or otherwise, to take this presentation, to download it at ing.org/history for free by registering for our lesson plans, and then embedding this into the curriculum. So I might have gone over a few minutes over, but thank you.
No, this was brilliant. Thank you so much. You did such an incredible job in the amount of time that you had. So a lot to discuss here. I'm going to jump right in. Thank you, Ishaq, very much for your good work. And I also want to give credit to Amina Jandali. Amina Jandali is our one of our content managers, and she worked extensively on this presentation as well, and other scholars that we've worked with, including actually Dr. Bilal King, who's with us, and others. And this is the problem with naming names, because I'm sure that I'm going to leave somebody out. But Dr. Bilal, I want to start with you really quickly, and wanted to ask you, as we just learned, the history of Muslim African Americans has deep roots in the United States. Is there a direct link between the enslaved African Muslims and the later rediscovery of Islam among African Americans, which is a question that I think people often ask? And if there is a link, by whom and when? And if not, then how did the rediscovery happen for African Americans who become Muslim?
Excellent question. You know, it's hard to say that the link is 100% direct documented, but it's also hard to say that there's not a direct link. And I think I can clarify why it has to be answered that way by talking about three people and three people. And you'll see why I group them this way. The first three people I'll quickly talk about are Edward Blyden, Sati Majid, and Duse Muhammad Ali. Edward Wilmot Blyden is unquestionably the earliest figure that we see who ideologically creates a marriage between the idea of Islam and the idea of Pan-Africanism, which is, for Black Americans, part of this bundle that comes with Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, the general sort of Black uplift. And so Blyden's teachings, Blyden writes a book in 1887, Christianity, Islam, and the European, I believe is the name of the book. But that book was so important, and he gave talks. He was actually originally from the Caribbean, and he gave talks really throughout the entire Atlantic world, but he had by then become based in Liberia, and he did a lot of his study of Islam in Sierra Leone, what's now Sierra Leone.
When did he live? I'm sorry, when did he live?
He died in the very late 1800s, in the 1890s. So he's born in the very early 1800s. He dies in the very late, not too long after the publication of the book. But his talks, right, were well attended. His book actually was quite controversial. The argument was that it was too well written for a Black person to have written it. And so he reissued it with a picture of himself so that there could be no question that the author was Black. And this caused quite a stir. But what becomes interesting is that none of the early founders of movements directly cite him. You don't hear, for example, ranging from the Sati Majids and Duse Muhammad Alis, who are coming directly from Egypt and Sudan and teaching Islam as it's being practiced in that part of the world to Black Americans. Nor do you hear it from people like Noble Drew Ali and Elijah Muhammad, who are teaching Islam in a way that's understood very indigenously to America, we might say. No one mentions Blyden of those people, and yet they're all doing some kind of combination of Islam and Black nationalism or Pan-Africanism in a way that makes it hard for people to not think that if they didn't directly engage Blyden, they must have spoken to people who had read Blyden's work or heard Blyden talk, and that this idea lived on. Really quickly, Sati Majid reintroduced Islam to people who would be sort of probably the grandchildren, if not children, of folks like Bilali Muhammad and Salih Bilali, who Ishaq just talked about in the presentation, whereas Dusay Muhammad Ali worked directly with Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey was the foremost hugely successful Black nationalist organizer who was himself from the Caribbean. He was Jamaican, but his movement, his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, was larger, far larger in the United States than it was in Jamaica. And so he at one point is said to have, through to the teachings of Dusay Muhammad Ali, been on the verge of proclaiming Islam the official religion of his movement, of his organization, I should say. And then he pulled back from it, but he continued. If you listen to Marcus Garvey's speeches or read them, there are books that give a compilation of his speeches. He had a tendency to talk about God in a very monotheistic way, not in a Trinitarian way, which if you know anything about Black America at that time, Christianity is not just dominant in Black America. Christian communities and Christian leadership were integral to the very fabric of constituting Black society in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so, you know, what might be a surprise that we'll talk about a little bit later is how they actually helped early Muslim movements in some substantial ways. But so those are the first three. I said 3 and 3. Dusay Muhammad Ali, Sati Majid, and Edward Wilmot Blyden. But on the other side of the water, there are people who are going to sort of reintroduce indigenous African approaches to understanding and living and practicing Islam to Black America. In the middle, you have a number of communities that are going to emerge, with the exception of Sheikh Dawood's community, largely with having been taught about Islam from someone who hailed from North Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, right? And so how did this reawakening happen? I posted in the chat just a second ago. Elijah Muhammad was taught his understanding of Islam by what we would call an immigrant Muslim today. Nobody knows for sure where he's from, right? Farad Muhammad. And I'll let the Imam sort of talk more about that if he knows more about that. But, you know, it's very interesting that is what gives rise to the Nation of Islam. Some of the most dynamic movements, like the Jamaat, the community that comes eventually under the leadership of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, when you look at who they were learning Islam from, it's primarily not West African Muslims, right? And many movements, you know, in between and around them. But by 1975, which is actually a pretty seminal year, because not only did Elijah Muhammad die, not only did Imam W.D. Muhammad rise to the leadership of the Nation of Islam, but Sheikh Ibrahima Niasse dies. And why is that significant? Because one of his descendants, one of his grandchildren actually, Sheikh Hassan Sise, was in graduate school in Chicago when Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse dies. And he had been in communication with a number of Black American Muslims. Anyone who knows about Muslim Black America knows Chicago is one of those headquarters of Black Muslim peoples. And so when he returns to Senegal in the wake of Ibrahim Niasse's death, he invites Black American Muslims to send their children. This is a completely unheard of thing, actually, to send their children to Senegal for Quran schooling.
When was
and
this?
So exactly, starting in the early 1980s, I want to say 82 might be the beginning.
Yeah.
But continuously since then, there have been Black American Muslim children going to boarding school, that is Quran school, in Medina Bay in Kaolack, Senegal. This becomes a reintroduction to that lineage. And as you saw in Ishaq's presentation, a number of the visible enslaved African Muslims in the antebellum era were from this part of the world. Right? They were from the Senegambia region in particular. And so what it does is it becomes one of those nodes that reconnects Black American Muslims with the tradition of Islamic scholarship and spiritual, right, and piety, if you will, through the Sufi practices and tradition that are indigenous to West Africa. And
Mhm.
there are other leaders.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Thank you so
If I were to-
much. This
Yeah.
this
No,
was
I
a
was just
lot
going to
of
say
history.
briefly the other names. And so it's
Yeah.
long, it's a long history, but I'll say Nyas, Bamba, and Uthman Fodio, and I'll leave it there.
Of course. Thank you so much. There's a lot there that that I'd want to actually listen to again to be able to ask you more questions, and I'm really interested in this. But Imam Fahim, in the interest of time, I want you to talk a little bit about the Nation of Islam. Like many Muslim African Americans, you are a former member of the Nation of Islam who converts to Orthodox Islam under the leadership of Imam W.D. Muhammad decades ago. Now, my understanding is that the Nation of Islam, which was led by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, had some major differences with Orthodox Islam. But despite that, the nation played an important role in the history of Islam in the United States. And so, Imam Fahim, I want you to talk a little bit about the major contributions of the nation. And I don't know if you know this or not, but what is the status of the nation today under the leadership of Louis Farrakhan? Would former Nation of Islam members who convert to Orthodox Islam even identify at all with the leadership of Louis Farrakhan? I want you to answer that later, but more important, I really want you to talk about the Nation of Islam and its role in the history of Islam in the United States. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
I was wondering what was happening.
Yeah, I think for the sake of time and to like extend the benefit of what Dr. Bilal has given us, I want to kind of stay in the same vein in terms of, okay, that one, as he mentioned, Farad Muhammad, for example, or explicitly, that was the one who taught Elijah Muhammad what he taught, which was the foundation and the formation of the Nation of Islam. I think an appreciation for that as a strand of the movement of al-Islam in the West is very important, because it's like I'm one of those creatures you have live in captivity for this moment, so I need to speak to just that feature. I think it'd be more beneficial to the audience. For as far as the current Nation of Islam, I really don't track them. I don't follow what's the status, this, that, and that. However, in terms of identification, there's no way to not identify with them, because we're born from the same root. And having been born from the same root, we have to, of course, respect that fact. But we know that the separation takes place when I'm going to assume a certain number of people in the audience know about the Aqidah. When the Aqidah is just
Creed.
It's like, this is the separation between me and thee. So basically, that's as far as I get. So far, I can't answer what the status of that is. But let me speak real quick to the Farad Muhammad strand. Talk about borrowings and context and exposure and the like, to really understand where the potency, where the power, where the life, where the energy, where actually what has constituted the sustainability of the Nation of Islam and how it is being represented by Minister Farrakhan now, and what was the original Nation of Islam. You got to understand a little more of what made it what it was. Without elaborating on it, it should be understood that Farad Muhammad borrowed ideas from all of these people, Marcus Garvey and others, that he amalgamated, synthesized, created a potion. Let's put it like that. Created a potion. And though I may be saying it in a way for brevity's sake that may seem to trivialize it, but it's really not. If it were trivial, if what he had done was trivial, then we wouldn't have all of the luminaries and all the figures that we have, that people uphold with pride that came from that potion, i.e. Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and even Minister Farrakhan. He has his followers, Imam Muhammad, and so many others. I need to make this statement here. Something I'm skipping over, but I'll mention it and go. And so every time you hear this word, then you'll say, oh, that's a very important narrative inside of that. And I'm saying just the word, the name Shabazz, just the name Shabazz, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, that comes out of the mythology of Yaqub, which is a big deal. In fact, I consider the Yaqub's myth as the active ingredient of the Nation of Islam that distinguishes it from all other representations of al-Islam in America. And I believe that it is that ingredient and what it does to people who embrace it and take it in, understand it, and are transformed by it. That's what gives them the force that we see from them. So I can't elaborate on it right now, but it's there. Now, Farad Muhammad, in his creation of it, he borrowed from Noble Drew Ali, he borrowed from Marcus Garvey, he borrowed from Father Divine, he borrowed from Carter G. Woodson, he borrowed from Booker T. Washington, and he concocted an organization and an order that is made up from the, I'm going to put it this way, the body parts of these other organizations. And this was a part of his genius in that he was able to take from those things, even the end times ideas that were boiling up at the time of his incarnating these messages. You know, the end of the world is near. You know, he borrowed stuff from the Jehovah's Witnesses and others who were calling for the end of the world. So we had things like, you know, the mother plane. We had so many other things. Let me tell you this. It's very, very serious. One of the name that he was given, or that he has, or that he gave us, was W.D. Farad. All right. So from a literary point of view, you have those ideas. There's one writer, his name escapes me right now. I'm not a college professor, but I played. But
we're also getting older.
The idea is the Great Gatsby, whoever that guy is.
Yeah.
The Great Gatsby, right? All of his characters had the two initial beginning in their name and then a last name. So that was a part of the play. That was a part of the symbolism in it all. So W.D. Farad, which wasn't his quote unquote proper name, it was his dramatic name that was a part of this whole process. I can assure you, you go online, look up H.G. Wells, find a picture of H.G. Wells, and then find a picture of W.D. Farad, which is out there. Put these two pictures side by side, and you will see that Farad Muhammad borrowed from H.G. Wells. And when you look at the Isle of Dr. Moreau, and you look at Yaqub's history and what was done in the Isle of Dr. Moreau, when you look at the Invisible Man, the way that story plays, and how it relates to the reveal was the guy that was doing the whole Invisible Man thing was an albino. That all of this kind of metaphysical creation was a part of the genius of Farad, but he painted it all black. And having painted all black, we haven't even talked about how he drew from the psyche of blacks who are already entrained by the white supremacist dominated church mind. He simply transformed the church ideals and iconography and metaphysics, and he painted them all black. So effectively, the Nation of Islam was a black church. It was a way of getting us out of that mind into a new mind, but you were still in the dark, but at least you were in the dark in your own house. And so there's a lot to that. I'm just gonna stop. I know that's a
no, I actually no. I think it's really important to talk about what happens after that. I mean, so finish the story. The nation.
Let me mention this to you, since I'm here and since we have it.
Yeah.
Things that we still consider the legacy of Imam Muhammad is work that's being done by. There are others, but here are a set of books, and about you know, any one of those stacks that you see behind me, they are probably W.D. Muhammad books. You know, take a stack of W.D. Muhammad.
I did not know that.
Here's one right here. And this is just from one set of conversations that was had on a regular basis for a number of years with a brother, Imam Ronald Shahid, who has continued the work of transcribing, translating, and putting into publishable form the work of the Imam. But here is a publication right here. The Mythological Concepts, The Burden on America and the West. This was, I would have to tell you the crown story that Imam Muhammad was put out of the Nation of Islam by Elijah Muhammad for not agreeing with the doctrine that Farad was God. That was the main separator between he and Elijah Muhammad. And when he came back, there were those who had heard him teaching something and they felt like this is going to be the nail in the coffin for Wallace Muhammad. So why don't we just take this material that he's talking about on the radio, show it to his father, and maybe his father would take his hand off him like Abu Talib had his hand over Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Elijah Muhammad had his hand over Wallace Muhammad because there were those in the Nation of Islam that did not agree with his differing with his father. The point is that this publication elaborates on the very thing that Imam Muhammad came with that brought about that transformation, because so much of what we were living with, one of which was the Yaqub's history, Yaqub's myth, and that kind of fantastic mythology, but powerful and important for identity. Everybody has their mythology. The Arabs have their mythology, the Africans have their mythology, the Asians have their mythology. The so-called American Negro didn't have a mythology. Yaqub gave us a mythology. The unfortunate side effect of the mythology is if you buy that, but then you don't know how to reinterpret it, then you're going to be trapped by it. What Imam Muhammad did was interpret that whole fantastic world of mythology that was given to us. And he said, and this is what it means. It doesn't mean that literally, it means this figuratively. This is why so many people, when Imam Muhammad came on scene, 75 and early, they said, bid'ah. Why are you saying that? Because that's not a part of the canon of Islam. That's not a part. Hey, we got a different problem that we're trying to solve here.
Exactly.
And so we need someone who knows what our diagnosis and what our prescription is. That's what Imam Muhammad did. And that's why he was so successful in transitioning those people who had been captured by the magnetic mythological language of Farad. Then Imam showed us how to untie ourselves from that puzzle and then tie ourselves with, the right aqidah to Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And that's what you're seeing today. You're seeing the success of the Imam in extricating those people psychically from that very powerful mythology. And those who stayed with that and went back to that, it was because there were people who could not, I don't know a nice way to say it. I don't know. How do you get unhooked after being hooked? Right, so you need a program for being unhooked. Imam was that program, and then once you get unhooked, now go on and live the successful life that you were originally created to live.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was really rich. One of the things that really attracted me to your masjid, Imam Fahim, when I came back to Islam, when I started practicing Islam, was how American it was, how familiar to me it was as an American. Islam was always associated with a religion back home, which was Egypt for me, or the Arab world, but when I walked into your masjid, and I walked into Imam Abu Qadr Amin's masjid, and both of you are, come out of the nation and W.D. Muhammad's movement, it just seemed so familiar, so American, and at the same time, religious and very spiritual as well. And that's what really attracted me. I've always felt, honestly, that if your masajid were in the middle of where, Muslims live, I think that your masajid would be incredibly huge, just because you're Americans, and but at the same time, Muslim and religious. So I love that, and I wish we had more time. I'm going to go over a little bit of time because I have two other questions that I really want to ask. And Dr. Balab, can you just briefly tell us why isn't Islam bigger in the African American community in general? I think many of us have always wondered about that. You know, what are the attitudes of the greater African American community towards Muslim African Americans historically as well as today? If you could just speak to that for maybe like 2 minutes
Yeah,
before I get to the final question.
I'm going to try to give the super condensed version because I went so long on the previous one.
That's
Yeah, I think that in the early part of the reawakening, you know, what you'll observe is actually Black American Muslims and non-Muslims were able to see eye to eye on a lot of things. They could, you know, make common cause, again, through Black nationalism or the idea more broadly of Black uplift. So some of the earliest publications by people in the Nation of Islam actually show up in very Christian affiliated publications or things like Ebony Magazine, right? But as I said earlier, the Black church has a long history from the late 1700s in the organization of Black community, the autonomous organization of Black community. And so when it became apparent that if the Muslims were to be fantastically successful, the church was going to continue to lose members, you know, you start to get some hardening of the lines, you start to get some resistance. For a while, that resistance was probably fairly ineffectual, right? So by the 1960s, and really from the 60s through the 90s, you have a flood of Black Americans into Islam, and there's a class distinction that's going to happen. So for the most part, Islamic Black America is going to be most normally associated with working class and poorer Black America. And almost ubiquitous with imprisoned Black America, which is an important point to get to in the post. But, you know, after the 90s, when you get to the early 2000s, there's kind of a 1-2 punch. You know, I'm going to try to do a summary. It's kind of a 1-2 punch that is the sort of 9/11, the fallout against Islam in 9/11 in general American culture, which there's always been a strain of sort of exoticizing and viewing Islam as something funny or something potentially too conservative or whatever, but it was balanced by other things. Post 9/11, right, that explodes. But then there's also been an internal, more secular, and in some wings of the Pan-Africanist movement, some wings of the nationalist movement, a Black Orientalism. And Sherman Jackson writes beautifully about some of the leaders of this kind of Black Orientalism, that they culminate, right, by the early 2000s in shifting really the equation that from the 60s to the 90s in Black American culture, Islam was associated with the Black freedom struggle, you know, 1-to-1. It's a 1-to-1 association. By the early 2000s, there are serious questions. Now you have young Black kids who are growing up and they're just as likely to think Islam might be something to equate with racism, anti-Black racism, let's be very clear, slavery. That's from the Black Orientalism. And then on the Islamophobia in general America side, there's the associations with, you know, oppression of women and, you know, crazy bombings of people who are minding their own business, so to speak. So that's the brief summary of kind of what stymies this.
We should do an entire webinar just on this topic, Black Orientalism, because I've actually confronted it myself. From African Americans that I work with, very sincere, very legitimate questions that they had about Islam and slavery. So that's a great conversation to get into. So final question for both of you, and this has, again, I want to go back to immigrant Muslim communities in the U.S. Despite their challenges of Islamophobia and being viewed through a national security lens, continue to believe that their wealth and education will get them through these challenges. Okay. What do you say to that? And I also want you to speak to what Muslim African Americans and their communities offer to immigrant communities. Because for the most part, right now, they're not really working together as well as they should. What can Muslim African Americans and their communities offer to immigrant communities? Imam Fahim, do we want to start with you first and then go to Dr. King, or?
I think my comment, I'm getting real back.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you fine.
Yes. My comment is brief and explicit enough. I'm going to go back to where I started when we opened up. It's the idea, it's about the religion. And I think it's very important to understand if a psychic bifurcation has happened in the mind of these Muslims that continue to find that as a, how can you say, as a challenge that they're unable to reconcile themselves to, i.e. establishing a relationship with indigenous, I'll call it African-American Muslims. So then you actually do have to face your own elitism. You have to face your own classism. You have to face how much you have imbibed, how much of the Kool-Aid of white supremacy you've actually drank. And now it's a part of you and you don't recognize it as a part of you. So there are people who have that problem. So I look at, in terms of all these resources, and we can count intellect among them, right? So there's value to education. We know there's value to institutionalized education, et cetera. But we also know that there is miseducation that can also happen with institutional education. So that relates to the Quran, where the Quran speaks about the Ad and the Thamud, where it says, and Satan proved victorious over them, even though they were blessed with skill and intelligence. So some people become arrogant because of their skill and intelligence. And Satan said, this is my favorite type, the ones who are so arrogant because of what they think they have. And they get undone by that process. So that's one of the reasons. One of the reasons is you need to associate with someone who has a different kind of relationship with faith, because there are so many who haven't suffered 1/4 of what the average African-American Muslim has suffered, but who has transcended and who has transformed and who has thrived because they embraced al-Islam. But you can't read the Quran.
Oh no, Imam Fahim is frozen, or am I frozen?
No, he's frozen on mine too.
He's frozen. Oh, okay. Oh my goodness. Oh, this was a really important point that he was he was going to make, which is powerful. I mean, I can speak to it as well. I mean, being a new Muslim.
I think he's back.
He might be back.
Back. Okay.
So
Let me just
when you embrace Islam, you were going to say something really important.
Well, the point is, human beings evolve on the basis of what's called the model imperative. The model imperative is just basically that we learn what we see exemplified. He said, you can't be it if you can't see it. Okay. So in terms of thriving in this society, we are talking about people who have suffered 400 years of inexplicable, unprecedented oppression, bigotry, whatever, but still I rise. Okay. I'll use that. Right. So, okay, the point is we need to know what makes you guys able to do that. And you're a Muslim. And you're not afraid to wear your Islam, your Muslim name, and go around. How you guys do that? That's what we can show people how to do. And that you don't have to always capitulate, and you don't have to scratch when there's no itch or shuffle when there's no music. You know what I'm saying? That's what many Muslims, many immigrant Muslims come to the world, and they start off on the Negro path that we got off of. Oh, I see. We would call that Tomming. You know what I'm saying? Like, no. Don't come in and be the new Tom in that sense, even though Uncle Tom got a bad rap. The point is that we can model for you, both in the experience that the doctor spoke of. Experience is the best teacher. You just got here. We've been here 400 years in the fire, and the fire is cool and peace for us. So it's like, you need to know, you need to drink some of what we drink it.
You don't have to try to be American. You are. You are. Yeah, mashallah. Thank you so much, Dr. Bilal.
I guess I would echo a whole lot of what the Imam says. So what I have to say will now be very, very short. I just think folks need to realize that Islam has been racialized in America at this point. And what that means, when a group of people become racialized in America, that means your wealth is completely vulnerable to white supremacist vultures whenever they get good and ready to pull a Black Wall Street on you. And if you
Tell them what Black Wall Street is. No,
Exactly.
Well,
If
just
you don't
can
know
you-
Black American history, you won't know what a Black Wall Street is.
Can
Black
you
Wall
just-
Street was 1921. We're talking about the most affluent Black community in the country. It was more affluent than the white part of town. And the
It was
whites,
wiped out.
their white neighbors made up an excuse, a mythical excuse to burn it to the ground. Right? That's the short version. But so your wealth won't protect you. You have to accept and understand what it means to have been racialized. It means that if you want protection, you need to build residentially, you need to build educationally, you need to build economically, you need to build social problemly shared ummah with the other Muslims who are here. That is the only thing that will protect you, because that's the only thing that Allah will protect. I'm not an imam, but I read the Quran. What Allah is telling Muslims is, I'm not going to protect you if you're not going to act like Muslims. And even with the protection, surely Allah will test those who say that they believe. So, you know, there'll be testing, but we won't lose it all for good. If we can come together.
MashaAllah. Thank you so much to both of you. We went over time by a little bit, and I apologize about that. But I want to, again, thank you both so much for your time with us today, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. We appreciate it. And I know that both of you are going to be back with us in future webinars of this series, and we look forward to that very much. May God reward you both immensely, you and your children and your families. So Ishaq, I'm now going to turn it over to you, and I want you to tell us about future webinars of the series.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so this is a 5-part webinar series. We have 4 more coming up, and they are 2 weeks apart from one another. So the next one is in 2 weeks on July 29th. And that will be focusing a little bit more on present day Muslim African American communities and all of the different ways that they have established institutions and mosques and organizations and things like that. 2 weeks after that, we'll have a panel on the roots of racism and especially institutional and structural racism as they function in the United States. 2 weeks after that,
very much related to what Dr. Bilal was just talking about with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
About the process of racialization.
On racialization during that call. And then that call is going to be a little bit more intersectional in including not only African-American speakers, but also South Asian Muslim, Jewish, indigenous peoples, Latinx, and Asian. And then after that, we'll kind of center in a little bit on racism in Muslim American communities today. And then we'll close the entire 5-part series with calls to actions, ways in which we can counter internalized racism. So join us every 2 weeks on Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. And if you'd like to receive updates to the series as well as recordings and things like that, you can register on the website at www.ing.org/Muslim African Americans. Great.
Thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and officially close, and we'll see you soon in another 2 weeks. This webinar will be up, will stay up, and so you'll be able to view it again and again if you want to. I know that I will for certain parts of it. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.